Shalom. Jewish holidays are multifaceted. The upcoming holiday of Shavuot is best known perhaps for the commemorating of the date of the receiving of the Torah of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai in the desert. It was also a time that we used to, as a sign of gratitude, bring the first fruits from our homes, from our farms, to the temple in Jerusalem. But according to a tradition, this is also a day of King David. King David was born and died on this day, according to tradition, kind of like a symbol of coming full circle. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things, of takeaways from King David that we can understand and take with us after reading the story of King David. First of all, when he's first introduced in the book of Samuel, it gives a very interesting description of King David, and it says, most translations would go, he was a redhead, a ruddy cheek, kind of had a red complexion, freckles maybe. He had a ruddy complexion. He had beautiful eyes. And then it uses a term, tov roi, which is often translated as handsome or looked good, but it's a very special mixture of words that can easily be understood as someone who sees the good. David, according to this idea, was a man who saw the good in people, who saw the good in events. He had that trait of seeing good. And especially these days, that's a very important trait to have. Later, that was when he was young. Later, he became king. And there was a very tragic and terrible story of how he succumbed to some evil impulses, and he committed adultery and murder. And the killing of this woman's husband was part of the cover-up. And he, as it were, was going to get away with it. And then a prophet came and told him a story about a man who had many sheep, who was very rich, and there was one man across the street from him who was very poor and had one sheep. And this man stole this man's one sheep, and what should he do? As king, he has to decide to have justice. And David says, kill him. He's liable for the penalty of death. And the prophet looks at him and says two words, very, very powerful words. Ata ha'ish. You are the man. And then in the script, there's a little white space. You can just imagine during this white space, before David reacts, he's thinking, I could kill this guy, and actually nobody would know. What is this chutzpah of this man coming and telling me, the king, what to do? So he's kind of having an inner discussion there during that white space. That's what we understand. And then he says one word, chatati, I've sinned. He took responsibility for his actions. It took a while. It took someone to come up and throw it into his face. He thought about it for a while, but in the end, he took responsibility for his actions. He didn't try afterwards to get away with it. He was caught, but he wasn't caught publicly. And he, in the end, it was known publicly what happened to him, and he took responsibility for his actions. And that was something that was another fascinating trait of King David. Now, along with this is another understanding. King David was king, and legally he had the right to put anybody to death that he wanted. He could do practically anything. And he could have killed this man. And perhaps legally it might have been, he could have killed the prophet who was trying to chastise him. But he didn't. And to understand in the ancient world, a king who was all-powerful, as it were, is succumbing to the chastising of a prophet. That means something. In other words, David understood here that the hierarchy isn't that the politician in this case was on top of the ladder, but that a spiritual leader would actually be on a higher level than him. When we would expect this, of course, from King David, but in this specific story, it was the prophet who overcame David, and he was the one who called the shots. And David's humility and understanding that he wasn't at the top of the hierarchical ladder of the people of Israel is very, very important even today. Our politicians are important and the media is important, but do they call the shots? Are they on top, or should people who are lofty and are spiritual leaders, they also perhaps have a role, a perhaps even more important role than the other people? That's something to think about, and something that David definitely, his humility brought that to the forefront. And lastly, his name, David. David comes from the word David, and David is the same letters as a lover. David was a lover. Sometimes it got him into trouble, but he was full of love, and he was loved. Now think about the word David or Dod, same letters. It's the same word as uncle. So when we say uncle or aunt, we don't really understand what that means in English, but in Hebrew, when you say uncle or aunt, you're saying loved one. I hope you had an uncle like I did, or an aunt like I did, because that's what really uncles and aunts should do. When I was 12, my uncle just bought a Cadillac, and as he was coming back home, he picked me up and let me drive it. I was 12, I almost crashed it. But that's what an uncle does. He doesn't have to worry about your education. He doesn't have to teach you values. He's supposed to love you and give you everything. That's what an aunt and uncle do. That was David. David was loved and loved. And that's another beautiful idea that we can take away from his life. It got him into trouble. You can't just, love freely and not pay consequences. You have to put borders around it. But we learn from David's stories and his life about these four important takeaways from his life story. I strongly suggest that we use Shavuot to take a few moments and read in the book of Samuel the life and times of King David. It's not all positive and it's not all fun. Some things are very, very tragic. There's a lot of pain also, just like life. But it's there to teach us Jewish values, which is something that we do a lot at Leaf Note, is teach and learn Jewish values. And I think Shavuot is a great time to learn the values that we can from David's life. Chag Sameach.